but it really did, it did put a shine on Jeff and the things that he did. And it was good because it took me out of my comfort zone. You know, those are the kind of things that happen that just help you creatively. I'm very proud of that match.
Jeff Hardy had already been thrown through tables, ladders and steel, but on one night in 2002, he stepped into the ring with one of the most intimidating men in WWE. The Undertaker wasn't just defending his championship, he was facing a young daredevil who had built his reputation by doing things most wrestlers wouldn't even consider. Hardy knew he was walking into a fight he probably couldn't win, but he had something to prove. And when the match was finally over, Jeff Hardy had lost the championship opportunity, yet somehow he walked away with something far more valuable. He had earned The Undertaker's respect. By 2002, Jeff Hardy was already becoming one of the most recognizable young stars in WWE. Alongside his brother Matt, Jeff had helped turn the Hardy Boyz into one of the most exciting tag teams of the Attitude Era. Their matches had changed the way fans looked at tag team wrestling. They climbed ladders, jumped from incredible heights, crashed through tables, and repeatedly put their bodies on the line just to entertain the crowd. But there was still a major difference between being an exciting young tag team wrestler and being taken seriously as a singles competitor. Jeff Hardy was known as the Daredevil. He was unpredictable, reckless, and willing to do almost anything. But some people still questioned whether he could survive as a serious singles star. He had the athletic ability, the charisma, and the connection with the audience. But there was one thing he hadn't fully earned yet: respect from the biggest names in the locker room. And then came The Undertaker. By this point, The Undertaker had already spent more than a decade establishing himself as one of WWE's most legendary performers. He had wrestled through multiple generations, survived brutal matches, headlined WrestleMania, and become one of the most feared men in the company. The Undertaker wasn't simply another veteran. He was the kind of wrestler whose presence could make an entire arena feel different. So when Jeff Hardy stepped up to challenge him, it felt like two completely different worlds were colliding. On one side was The Undertaker, a massive veteran with years of experience and a reputation for destroying anyone who stood in his way. On the other was Jeff Hardy, a young superstar who had built his career around taking risks and refusing to back down. And the match wasn't going to be a normal wrestling match. It was going to be a ladder match, which made the challenge even more dangerous for Hardy. Jeff Hardy had already become closely associated with ladder matches. The Hardy Boyz had helped make them famous during their legendary battles with Edge and Christian and the Dudley Boyz. Jeff had repeatedly thrown himself from impossible heights, using the ladder not just as a weapon, but as a launch pad for some of the most unforgettable moments of his career. But this time, the ladder wasn't being used to win a tag team championship. This time, Jeff Hardy was using it to try to defeat The Undertaker and take the Undisputed WWE Championship. The stakes were enormous. The Undertaker was the champion, and Jeff Hardy wanted the title. But there was something bigger underneath the match. Jeff Hardy was trying to prove that he belonged in the same conversation as WWE's biggest stars. He wasn't just looking for a championship opportunity. He was trying to show everyone that he could stand across the ring from one of WWE's most established legends and survive. The match took place on Raw in 2002, and from the opening moments, it became obvious that Hardy was facing an enormous challenge. The Undertaker had the experience, the strength, and the size advantage. Jeff had speed and agility, but none of that guaranteed survival against a man like The Undertaker, and Hardy knew exactly what he had to do. He had to keep getting back up. The ladder quickly became a weapon for both men. Hardy moved around the ring with the kind of speed that made it difficult for The Undertaker to catch him. He climbed whenever he had the opportunity, trying to reach the championship before The Undertaker could stop him. But every time Hardy seemed close, The Undertaker found a way to pull him back down. The physical difference between them was impossible to ignore. The Undertaker could throw Hardy across the ring with ease. He could catch him in midair, drive him into the mat, and use the ladder against him. But Hardy kept returning. That was what made the match so special. Jeff Hardy wasn't supposed to overpower The Undertaker. That would have made no sense. His story was about surviving him. Every time Hardy took punishment, the crowd expected him to stay down. Instead, he climbed again. Every time The Undertaker knocked him off the ladder, Hardy found another opportunity. Every time it looked like the match was finished, Hardy continued fighting. And eventually something began to change. The Undertaker realized that this wasn't simply a young wrestler trying to steal a championship. Jeff Hardy was refusing to quit. That was something The Undertaker understood better than almost anyone. The Undertaker had built his career on toughness. He had wrestled through injuries, pain, and brutal matches. He understood what it meant to keep going when your body was telling you to stop. And now he was watching a much younger wrestler demonstrate exactly the same mentality. But Hardy still had one major problem. The Undertaker was still The Undertaker. Jeff could survive punishment, but surviving wasn't the same as winning. Eventually, The Undertaker began taking control of the match. Hardy's body had already absorbed an incredible amount of punishment, while The Undertaker continued to use his power to prevent him from reaching the championship. Still, Hardy refused to stop. He kept climbing. And that became the central story of the match. It wasn't about whether Jeff Hardy could physically overpower The Undertaker. He couldn't. It was about whether he could convince one of the most respected wrestlers in WWE that he belonged. Then came one of the moments that made the match unforgettable. Hardy climbed the ladder again, desperately trying to reach the championship. The Undertaker followed him. For a moment, both men were fighting near the top of the ladder. Hardy was exhausted, but he continued throwing punches and refusing to surrender. The Undertaker eventually knocked him down, but Jeff Hardy got back up again. That happened repeatedly throughout the match. The Undertaker could knock Hardy down, but he couldn't make him quit. And eventually, The Undertaker won. The championship remained with The Undertaker, and Jeff Hardy had failed to capture the title. On paper, it looked like another loss for a young superstar who was still trying to establish himself. But then something happened that completely changed the meaning of the match. The Undertaker began walking away. He had won. He had retained his championship. The story should have ended there. But The Undertaker stopped. He looked back at Jeff Hardy, and instead of simply leaving him behind, The Undertaker returned to the ring. That moment said more than any long promo could have said. The Undertaker raised Jeff Hardy's hand. The message was clear. Jeff Hardy had lost the match, but he had earned the respect of The Undertaker. For a young wrestler, that was enormous. The Undertaker wasn't known for giving away respect. He wasn't someone who needed to flatter younger performers. When The Undertaker acknowledged somebody, fans understood that it meant something. And on that night, he acknowledged Jeff Hardy. Hardy hadn't defeated The Undertaker. He hadn't won the championship. He hadn't even become the undisputed champion. But he had done something that mattered just as much. He had proven that he belonged. And that's why the match became such an important moment in Jeff Hardy's career. Before that night, people knew Jeff Hardy as a daredevil. They knew him as one half of the Hardy Boys. They knew him for his crazy dives and ladder spots. But after that match, there was another part of his identity. He was a fighter. He could stand across from one of WWE's most intimidating legends and refuse to quit. That distinction mattered because becoming a singles star isn't just about having talent. It's about convincing the audience and the locker room that you can carry yourself as a major competitor. Jeff Hardy was beginning to do exactly that. The Undertaker had unknowingly given him something that no championship could provide at that moment: validation. And what's fascinating is that The Undertaker wasn't the only person who saw something in Hardy. Fans had already connected with him for years. They had watched him and Matt Hardy take unbelievable risks. They had watched Jeff become one of the most exciting performers in the company. But this was different. The match showed that Hardy could tell a story without needing to win. He could make the audience believe he was fighting for something bigger than a championship. He was fighting for recognition, and that is why the ending worked so perfectly. If Jeff Hardy had defeated The Undertaker that night, it would have been an incredible upset, but it might not have carried the same emotional weight. By losing, Hardy demonstrated something more important. He could take everything The Undertaker gave him and still stand. That was the victory. And The Undertaker understood it. The moment also became one of those rare examples of a veteran helping elevate a younger wrestler without making the younger wrestler look weak. The Undertaker won because he was still the champion and the established legend. But by raising Hardy's hand afterward, he told the audience that Jeff Hardy had earned his place. It was almost like The Undertaker was saying, without words, that Hardy was ready for what came next. And what came next for Jeff Hardy was a major transformation. His popularity continued to grow. His singles career became more important. He became one of WWE's most beloved performers. Eventually, Hardy would go on to capture major singles championships and become a main event level superstar. But moments like the match with The Undertaker helped build the foundation for that success. Because before Jeff Hardy could become a world champion, he had to convince people that he could survive against world champions. And The Undertaker was the perfect person to test him. The match also showed why Jeff Hardy's connection with the audience was so powerful. Fans didn't cheer Hardy simply because he was athletic. They cheered because he made them feel every impact. When Jeff climbed the ladder, fans didn't just see a wrestler climbing toward a championship. They saw someone risking everything. When he fell, the audience felt the pain. When he stood up again, they wanted him to succeed. That emotional connection eventually became one of the biggest strengths of Jeff Hardy's career. And The Undertaker helped bring it out. There was also something symbolic about the two men standing across from each other. The Undertaker represented longevity. Jeff Hardy represented the future. The Undertaker had already survived almost everything WWE could throw at him. Jeff was still building his legacy. The match was almost like a passing of the torch. Not an official one, but a symbolic one. The Undertaker wasn't retiring. He wasn't stepping away, but by raising Hardy's hand, he was acknowledging that the younger generation had arrived, and that is why this moment has remained so memorable. Wrestling is full of championship victories. Every year somebody wins a title. Every year somebody loses one. Those moments are important, but they eventually become statistics. Respect is different. You can't put it around someone's waist. You can't defend it at a pay-per-view. You can't lose it because of a referee's 3 count. Respect has to be earned. And Jeff Hardy earned it by refusing to quit. The story becomes even more impressive when you remember how different Jeff Hardy looked from The Undertaker at the time. The Undertaker was physically imposing and carried himself like someone who had already conquered the business. Hardy was younger, smaller, and still trying to prove himself. Yet none of that mattered once the bell rang. Hardy fought like he had nothing to lose. And perhaps that was exactly what The Undertaker respected.